morning. Good to be with you this morning. If you've got your Bibles, open to the book of Hebrews chapter 4. And we're going to talk about the Sabbath, which is kind of an odd concept for me. Quit laughing. It wasn't that funny. No, it was not. It's just normal Sunday. Quit laughing. You're going to make me laugh, then we'll all be messed up. And I forgot I can't move again. So we're going to be in Hebrews chapter 4, and we're going to talk about the Sabbath. But not just the Sabbath. We're going to talk about rest in particular. And so Hebrews 4:9, I'll give you a minute to get there. And I'm trying to think of some filler stuff while you're getting there. Danny's giving me an odd look, and now he's getting up. Okay, is everybody there? Hebrews chapter 4, verse 9. Hebrews 4:9 says, "Therefore then remaineth a rest for the people of God." Now, depending on your translation, it may say something like a Sabbath rest. Is my microphone not on? Yep. It's on. I'm just not loud enough. There, I just got louder all of a sudden. So Hebrews 4:9. So the writer of Hebrews talks about something he calls a rest in the King James. If you look at the NIV or the New American Standard or later translations, you will see that there's actually a word kind of added in there that I'm okay with. My NIV says, "Therefore then remains a Sabbath rest for the people of God." And so the idea that is conveyed in Hebrews is that there is a rest, or there is a Sabbath that is being talked about or described about. So on Wednesday night, one of the things we talked about in Bible study was Sabbath. And since it was my night to teach, that was deliberate on my part, because what I wanted to do was set the groundwork for what I was going to do this morning. So we talked about a Sabbath, and I don't know that we fully got through it all, but what I hoped that you understood out of that is that the Sabbath is not just a day. See, in the Old Testament, we've got this idea of a Sabbath. And so our first understanding of a Sabbath comes from the Ten Commandments, when God says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you'll do all your work and all your labor, and on the seventh day you'll rest. And so the principle that kind of pins up the idea of the Sabbath also comes from Exodus 20 and Genesis 1 and 2. And so the principle upon which the Sabbath is built on is the idea that God created everything in 6 days, and on the seventh day He rested from His labor. Now, He's God, and He doesn't need to rest from His labor because He doesn't get tired like we do. But He set the principle upon which the Sabbath is built. So our first understanding of the Sabbath comes from Exodus 20. Remember the Sabbath what? Day to keep it holy. So most of us have grown up with the understanding that there is a Sabbath day in which we're to set aside. We're not to do any work. We're to rest, and we're to observe like religious stuff, like go to church and read your Bible, stuff like that. And so what day is the Sabbath day? Well, I heard a mix. I expected everybody to say Sunday, but I know some of you know that it's not. So the Sabbath day. Does anybody know what Sabbath means? It means 7. Or 7. Okay? So the Sabbath day is what day of the week? The Saturday, which is the 7th day. Yeah, see, you're making the connection now. So the Sabbath day is Saturday in Orthodox Judaism. In Christianity, and I don't want to say we moved the Sabbath day because I don't think we did. So Christians began to worship on the first day of the week. And so that was a little different. You see, the early church probably, especially in and around Jerusalem, they probably still observed the Sabbath day because it was predominantly a Jewish church. But what we know is that at some point during the early life of the church, they began to gather together on the first day of the week. We know that because when Paul writes to the Corinthians, he tells them to set aside an offering or a portion of their income to be collected on the first day of the week when they come together. We also know from the book of Acts that very early on, the early church began to meet on the day in which Jesus was resurrected, which is the first day of the week. So many of us have grown up with the idea that observing the Sabbath is what we do on Sunday as Christians, not necessarily on Saturday. So for me as a kid, my mom was pretty strict about the Sabbath. We were not allowed to work. There were a lot of things we're not allowed to do on the Sabbath. And really just kind of a day of rest and relaxation and getting together with family. But what we learned, I hope, on Wednesday night is that the Sabbath is not a day, because it was expanded from a day to every 7 years into what we call a Sabbath year. And in the Sabbath year, for one whole year, all the land was to lie fallow. There was supposed to be no tilling, no plowing, no sowing, no reaping. Everything was going to lie fallow. And so the seventh year was really a kind of a unique year nobody did any work for the whole year, because in a Sabbath year, you ceased from your labor and you couldn't do anything. And then it was expanded even to a deeper understanding in what we call the year of Jubilee, which, look, I would love to have a year of Jubilee. I don't know about all of you. I think it'd be an awesome concept, because when you think about it, the year of Jubilee followed the 7th Sabbath year. So what it meant is that for 2 years, in year number 49 and year number 50, you didn't do any work in Israel. You didn't plow the ground, you didn't sow the ground, you didn't reap the ground. For in the 49th year, which was a Sabbath year, and in the year of Jubilee, you didn't do that kind of work. But the really cool thing that I think I would like about it, all property returned to its original family. So if you had sold your property, and really you didn't sell your property like we understand it, you sold the ability of your property to produce something. So when you sold it, they determined the number of years to the Sabbath of Jubilee, and that's how land was bought then, and then in the 50th year returned to its family. All slaves had to be set free. So if you had gone into extreme poverty, okay, back in these days it wasn't like it is now. You go into extreme poverty now, you can declare bankruptcy, okay, and you can have your assets liquidated if you have assets, and somehow you avoid, major penalties. Some states, back in the 16, 17, and maybe, I don't think into the 1800s, you know what the penalty for bankruptcy was? Hanging. Yeah, in America, or maybe in the pre-American day. That was because you just expected to be a good steward, so you didn't go bankrupt. And so, back in this day and age, we've got all these safety nets. As a matter of fact, we live in a culture where we can't let many people go bankrupt. We can't let many people fall into extreme poverty, or else we'll just collapse as a country. So we've got all these things in place that prop up poor people and prop up our economy. And so in the Sabbath day, anybody who had gone into extreme poverty and had to sell themselves as a servant, because that's what you had to do in those day and age. If you couldn't pay your debts, you didn't go to a judge and say, hey, forgive me of my debts, and he wipes it clean. You sold yourself as a servant or a slave. So in the year of Jubilee, all property returned to its rightful families, all slaves or servants were set free, and it was just this time of rejoicing. So the Sabbath, as we understand it, was more than a day, more than a year, or more than a period. It really was an attitude in which I acknowledged and understood that God is the one who provides for me every day of my life. So the Sabbath, a lot of us has grown up, man, I can't move, it's driving me crazy. So a lot of us have grown up with this idea that if I observe a day and I don't do much work, then I'm observing the Sabbath. And that really is to misunderstand what the Sabbath is, because the Sabbath is more than just a day. It's the way in which we as believers live our lives that acknowledges and honors God in everything we do. And we don't do a great job of that sometimes, do we? No, I think we take for granted what we've got. We take for granted the jobs we have and the income that we have. We take for granted all the things that God has blessed us with. And we don't only take it for granted, we get kind of greedy. We get kind of jealous of what other people have. And so we invest ourselves into more work to get what somebody else has. And so that kind of defies the whole concept. So what we want to do is we want to talk about Sabbath in two ways. We want to talk about Sabbath, first of all, as a rest, or a cessation of labor. Is that the right way to say it? Cessation or cessation? I don't know. Stopping your work. How about that? Okay? So one, it's going to be a rest. Two, it is going to be a release, because what we often miss in our Christian understanding of what the Sabbath day is, we say it's a day of rest. It's a day of release. And so there's much more to it than just what we think of as, well, I'm going to take a day off. And so there's a bigger concept we want to embrace. So we're going to start this morning by doing that with the understanding of rest. And so what the writer of Hebrews says in verse 9 is that therefore then there remains a rest for the people of God. And so we want to understand what this rest is, because he says the people of God can or should have entered into a rest. And yet, when I look at our culture, when I look at the church, when I look at people who go to church, is rest the word you would use to describe them? I mean, if you look around our culture and say, you know what, we're a culture that likes to take it easy and enjoy our time off. I don't think so. I mean, look, we used to joke years ago, if you go on vacation with my family and the McAllister family, look, our wives will micromanage every detail of our vacation. And I remember the first time we went on a cruise with the McAllisters, And what you call them, the vacation Nazis or something like that, Phil. I can't remember what it was, but they had every detail of our day worked out to the minute. See, when I go on vacation, I really don't need my details worked out to the minute. You know what I need when I'm on vacation on a cruise? I need an iPad, some earbuds, and a pool chair. That's all I need. Isn't that all I need? I just go up on the deck and I lay in the sun and I bake like a lobster. And I love it. See, that's my idea of a vacation. There's no structure to it. That's rest to me. And I love that. But I do that. How many times we go on vacation a year? 1. I get a whole week's vacation in my life. And that's kind of the culture we live in, isn't it? You get a week's vacation a year. You go and you do something fun, but it's not really fun because you pack so much into that week that it's really not a vacation, and you come back more stressed and more worn out than before you left. And so when I look at our culture, I don't see a culture that embraces rest as a good thing. I see a culture that kind of pushes rest away as a bad thing. We're just not into rest, like maybe God says we need to rest. And so hopefully we can understand that a little bit better as we talk about the Sabbath day as a day of rest, or at least the principle of the Sabbath day as a day of rest. And so we want to contextualize this. So the way I contextualize this, if you look at the entire section of Hebrews 4, and if you were to back up to verse 1 and start reading, it would probably give you better context. So the way I've contextualized verse 9 is by the verses that surround it. In particular, the quotes that come around it. The first one comes from verse 3, when the writer of Hebrews quotes from what we believe is Psalm 95, and he says, "So I declared an oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest." So because that's the way I contextualize this particular section of Hebrews, I went back to Psalm 95 to find out, well, what did Psalm 95 say and what was it intended to do? So when you go back to Psalm 95, what you find out is that psalm was written so that the people of Israel would remember 2 critical events in their history as a nation. Number 1, I believe, comes from Numbers 18 or 20, and it's the time in which Israel had come out of Egypt, so they're no longer captives in Egypt, and as they're wandering in the desert, they have a need for water. And they go to Moses and they say, "Look, you brought us out here in the desert to die. You brought us out of Egypt, and now there's no water, and we're all going to die of thirst." And so Moses was a little bit angry. God was certainly angry because they were unwilling to trust him. And so God remembered that event. As a matter of fact, I think in Psalm 95 it's called the quarreling. Okay, God remembered that event as a day in which Israel brought a quarrel or an argument against him because they didn't believe that God was going to provide for their needs. You remember there was another event, probably with the same situation, where Moses was so frustrated when God said, "Speak to the rock." What did Moses do? He struck the rock. And so it would have been very frustrating. And I always got that about Moses when he struck the rock. It made perfect sense to me. It wasn't the right thing to do, but it made sense because that would have been a frustrating situation. So the people of Israel, they didn't trust God. And so because of that, God remembered that. And then there was the second event as they stood on the border of Kadesh Barnea, ready to go into the promised land. You've got these 12 spies who've just come back, and they brought evidence of what the promised land contains. And they said, "Surely it's a land that flows with milk and honey. Here are the grapes, and here's some of the produce of the land." But it says that 10 of the spies, King James says, they made the heart of the people melt, because they said, "We've been to the land, and we've seen the land, and surely there are giants in the land, and we were in their eyes like grasshoppers." And the hearts of the people of Israel melted away. Remember, that's when Joshua and Caleb, they made all the people be quiet. And I think it was Caleb. No, it was Caleb. It was Joshua. It was both of them. Basically said, "Let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome them." And so when that occurred in Kadesh Barnea, God remembered that. And so that's when God said, "Look, you're disobedient. You don't trust me to give you what I can provide for you. So you are going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. And when all of you who doubted me are dead," except for Joshua and Caleb, "when all of your carcasses," I think it says, "have fallen in the wilderness, then the people will get to go in. So God remembered that. And so in what he said then, when we read Psalm 95, is that I swore in my anger, you would never enter into rest. And so here are the people of Israel on the border of this land that they get to go into. They're going to occupy houses that they didn't build. They're going to eat from fields that they never tended. They're going to enjoy the fruit of the land, and they have invested no labor. Is anybody besides me think that's awesome? You get to live in a house you didn't buy or build. You get to eat food you didn't work to get. That's what God is going to do for you. And what do you say? No, we don't want that. And so God, because he was angry at the people, said they're never going to enter into my rest. And so now as we get back into Hebrews 4, we get the context a little bit better, because the writer of Hebrews says, okay, that's what God said. God said, I swore in my anger they would never enter into rest, but now that's all changing. And so what he does is he uses the picture of Jesus to help us understand how this is now fulfilled in our lives. And that ultimately brings us to verse 9, when he says, therefore remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. And so as we understand this Sabbath rest, and by the way, the word that is translated as rest in the King James, if you were to look that word up in Greek, basically that word appears 66 times, I think, in the New Testament. 57 times it's translated as Sabbath or Sabbath day. One time it's translated as rest, which is right here. So the idea behind the word that the writer of Hebrews uses is the idea of a Sabbath or a rest. And so what he's saying then is that we, who are now in Jesus, have entered into that rest. We can experience the rest that he talks about, but probably, I would guess that many of us don't experience rest. Matter of fact, as I look at our culture, and I think I said this a couple days ago, I think we're a restless culture. We're a culture that always needs to be on the move. We always need to have some kind of noise in our lives. We've got to have the radio on. We've got to have the TV on. We've got to have something going on in our lives that keeps our mind occupied with something. And you realize that if you do that, you really don't get rest. You know, I don't think I did it. I think Rhonda did it. Rhonda accidentally locked herself out of the bedroom the other night, and she couldn't get in to go to sleep. I went to bed before she did, and when she went to go to bed, guess what? Door's locked. Can't get it open because we don't even have keys to our... I don't even know our door's really locked, to be honest with you, inside. And they do. You got to have some little weird, like one of those keys you open a cat food with. That's what you open our locks with. And so Rhonda could not get into the bedroom. And so a lot of times when Rhonda comes to bed, if I'm already asleep and she's not tired, she'll come to bed and she'll turn on the TV and have the TV on. And I'll wake up a couple times at night because the TV's on. Because some people don't turn TVs off when they go to bed, so it stays on all night. And so I got up, was that Saturday morning? No, it was Friday morning. Like, wow, I just had the best night's sleep I've had in years. What's different about today? It was because my wife was locked out of the room. And I got up so rested. I opened the door. I'm like, how come you slept on the couch? She's like, my back is killing me. You locked me out last night. I'm like, hey, I didn't lock you out. So I got a great night's rest. You know what she got? Bad night's rest. And I attributed to the fact that there was no distractions. There was no light. There was no sound. There was no, because Rhonda takes up her half of the bed in the middle. So, there was like all this territory for me to just expand on. And I could just stretch out. And I got such a great night of rest, but that doesn't happen every night. I want you to know that. Normally when I go to bed, I don't always sleep well. Do some of you have trouble sleeping? I do occasionally, not every night. Some do. I mean, well, never mind. I'm not going to say that. But either way, I don't know that rest is something we get as a culture, or we don't take advantage of it, or we don't appreciate it when we've got an opportunity to rest. Because most of the people I know, they fill their downtime with something else. Now, look, it may be as crazy as binge watching. I don't know, what's some people binge watch? Michaela, what do you binge watch? What's that crazy show that you binge watched not long ago? Oh, The Lion King. Lion King? Tiger King. That's something like that. So even in your downtime, The Lion King, who watched? Never mind. So anyways, So anyways, even in your downtime, you know what people do? We fill our minds with stuff. We fill our brains, our eyes, our ears. We fill with all this stuff. And so we never get to a point where we experience what I would call rest. And that's the culture we live in. I remember having to stay in downtown Lima one night, long time ago. I think I was here, but it was just, I mean, it was a long time ago. And I was staying by myself downtown, and I heard sirens. I guess it was police cars and ambulances and trucks. And all night, just noise all the time. And I remember I was there for one night. I remember thinking, how do people live down here? How do people sleep? But there's constant noise. I just don't know how you rest. But, you know, maybe some people get accustomed to that. I'm not sure that I do. So I don't know that we live in a culture where rest is what we get in our downtime. What I believe about our culture is that we're a culture that I think is almost obsessed with the idea of work. We love work, don't we? Now, we say we don't. We're like, no, I don't like it. Well, I mean, I can't wait to retire. Or at least I say that anyways. So I think we're kind of obsessed with work to some extent. And think about it. One of the questions we ask someone when we meet them for the first time is what? Where do you work? Or what do you do? I mean, isn't that pretty common, Phil? I mean, isn't that what we say? We meet someone new, we're like, well, what do you do? And unfortunately, in American culture, we've kind of created this world in which we identify people by what they do. Well, you're an engineer, you're an IT person, you're a delivery guy, you're a teacher, you're whatever. So we live in a culture, we say to someone, what do you do? Or, you know, tell me about your life. And so we always start with our job. And we want to tell people what we do because in American culture, so much of what we do defines who we are. But that's not the way God intended us to be. God did not intend us to be workers who maybe are Christians, or maybe not. God intended us to be people. First and above everything else. It's always just kind of bugged me that we called, you know, back in the old days, we used to have personnel departments. Anybody remember when you have to go to personnel? I mean, I remember that. Now, you know what we call personnel? HR, human resources. Because you know what people are to us? They're a resource. They're not people. They're not personnel. They're a resource. And like so much of American culture, and this is the dark side of our materialistic culture and capitalism when you bring it together. So in our culture, we don't work to live like they did maybe 200 years ago. See, there was a time in America when your daily work provided for your daily needs. You didn't go to the grocery store and buy 2 weeks worth of food. Matter of fact, you didn't just show up and they put it in your car for you, then you put it in your freezer and in your pantry. There was a time in the history of our country when you worked every day so that you could live every day. You went out and you worked in the ground. I mean, think about making bread 1,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago. Think about making bread in Jesus' day. Making bread in Jesus' day was not as simple as going to the store and getting some flour and yeast and sugar and water. One, is that the 4 basics for bread? Okay, you go to the store and you get them now. Imagine doing that 6,000 years ago. How do you make bread 6,000 years ago? Well, first you got to plant some grain. Then after the grain is fully matured, you've got to go get the grain. And then you've got to grind the grain. And then you've got to get yeast. How do you get yeast 6,000 years ago?
Out of the air.
Out of the air. So you've taken your grain, you've put some water in it, I assume, Kara, if I'm doing the process right. Maybe some sugar.
Put a little sugar in there. You don't have to. You just be flour and water in it.
Flour and water. Set it up in a window. How long does it take to get that good bacteria? Good week. So, hey, do you want some bread with lunch today? Well, it'll be ready next Sunday. I mean, that's kind of the concept, right? So if you want bread, you better plant it. I mean, because I would buy that. I mean, you'd have to set your dough up and let it ferment, because that's what it does.
But once you got to start, Brian, you just keep adding to it and let yeast just keep going. So.
Okay. And then maybe it is, I'm just saying it's hard, right?
It is.
It's not as simple as saying, hey, do you want bread today? Okay, well, let me throw some in the oven. And so then, did you throw it in the oven, ladies? And throw it in the oven. Or maybe you had one of those cool outside ovens, but more than likely, you got to bake it over a fire. And if you had an oven, you got to build a fire in the oven. So you got to get a fire going. You got to wait for the temperature to come up. See, what I'm saying is, there was a day in which something as simple as eating bread that we take for granted. Matter of fact, man, we had bread this morning for breakfast. That changed the whole course of my breakfast, didn't it? Changed the whole course. I didn't have bread. So I can't. If I don't have bread, I can't eat cocoa wheats. If I can't eat cocoa wheats, I'm going to have to eat something healthy. So I had to eat an apple and some raisin bran. So look, something as simple as bread can change the whole course of my day. And it's so simple to get, but it wasn't. So there was a time in which you worked Because that's how you lived. That's what you had to do. Is that the way it is today? No, not so much. We don't work so that we can live every day. As a matter of fact, I would say it's the opposite. It's backwards. We live in American culture so we can work. That's what we do. We live our lives so we can earn money. And we love to earn money. Well, do we love to earn money? Man, in America, we love money. Probably more than anything else. We love to earn money, but this is what I've learned. If there's one thing we love more than earning money, it's getting money that we didn't earn. We love money. And so we've invested ourselves in our careers to the extent that they are who we are. And so they define who we are, they define what we do, they define everything about our lives. And so we're not working so that we can live every day. We live every day so we can go to work, and we complain about, well, I can't wait for the weekend to get here. Matter of fact, you ever listen to a country music song? Yeah, they can't wait for the weekend, right? And then they got to go back in and do it all over again on Monday. And that's the way we live our lives. And so we go back and we do it all again. And so, you know, when my grandparents were younger, even when my grandparents were alive, for a lot of their lives, you know, they didn't have easy lives. My dad didn't have an easy life compared to what I have today. I mean, my dad grew up on a farm where they still used horses. So, you know, they had hard lives. They had to work hard for everything they got. And if you go back far enough, you know, we were a culture where everything you want to do was just hard work. It was backbreaking work. We don't do backbreaking work today like maybe they did 200 or 300 years ago. We're not, some people do, but for the most part, we're not a culture that's into backbreaking work. For the most part, we're into mind-numbing work. We're into work that just kind of wears your brain out. You keep doing it over and over again, and it just wears on you. That's one of the reasons I think we're so stressed out as a culture. We're stressed out, we're worn out, we just go through the grind, and it's not like, you know, when we think about Adam, you know, part of the curse of sin in the Garden of Eden was that Adam was going to toil in the land. See, prior to this, did Adam work before sin? Yeah, Adam had to tend the garden, keep it. That's what his job was. So work is not bad in and of itself. You see, the curse, or part of the curse in the Garden of Eden, is that Adam now is going to have to bring forth food in the sweat of his brow. And he's going to have hard toil with the land. And as he works the land, it's going to work against him. So whereas the land had always yielded up its abundance, now the land's not going to do that because it's going to produce briars or thistles and thorns that are now going to creep into the garden. And you know what weeds do in a garden? Kara, are weeds good in a garden? No. You know what my wife said to me the other day? It takes me like 4.5 hours to rototill our garden. And so, you know, she said, you've been up in the garden all this time? And I said, yeah, I've been tilling and hoeing weeds. And she said, did that many weeds really grow in a garden? Kendall, can you believe that? Let me tell you, my garden, so I plant stuff deliberately and I nurture it to get it to grow. I don't do anything with the weeds except try to kill them. And they easily overtake my plants. I've never seen anything like it. It's almost like the weeds are naturally created to take over everything. That's part of the curse. And so Adam's curse, part of his curse in the Garden of Eden, is not that he has to work. It's that his work now is going to be backbreaking. And he's going to be worn out. And ultimately, you know what his work is going to do? It's going to turn him back into what he was taken from. And as he returns to the dust of the ground. And all the days of his life are going to be hard toil. Well, I don't know that I would say our jobs are hard labor like maybe they used to do. It doesn't mean there's not a curse associated still with it. Because, you know, we invest ourselves in our jobs in an unhealthy way. I think we do. And I'm guilty of that myself. You know, I'm guilty of probably spending way too much time worried about work and not enough about other things going on. Because our culture says you need to be consumed by your work. That's why your phone always goes off. It beeps and it dings and it makes weird noises. And some of you are set up so that those weird noises alert you to what's going on at work. Matter of fact, I went over on, I think it was Friday evening. It was Friday evening. Because I just go to work, make sure everything's okay. And when I pulled in, as soon as I pulled in, I heard a distinct sound of beeping. Look, if you're ever out and you hear a beeping, I'm going to say that's generally a bad thing. Could be a time bomb. You ever watched a movie? I actually thought for a second I better get my pliers out. I'm going to have to MacGyver this thing. It was actually just our generator, and it was beeping because it had an alert, an error on it. And so I go fix it. That's what we do. That's the world we live in, where we're just connected to our jobs in a way that's unhealthy. Because we spend our Friday nights or our Saturday nights or our Monday nights or whenever connected to our jobs. And so what it does, it creates the attitude or the idea within us that rest is not really important. I don't need rest. Matter of fact, I've joked before. I think my mom said one time, Brian, you need to slow down a little bit and get some rest. And I said, Mom, I'll get all the rest I need when I'm dead. That's a terrible attitude if you think about it. Because, look, God didn't design us to just work for infinity. God didn't design our bodies to just go and go and go and be able to do that. God, in His omnipotent wisdom, understood that the created being He called man needed a day of rest. He understood that. But not just man. That's the beauty of the Sabbath. God didn't just say, man needs a break. You know what else gets a break in the Sabbath laws of God? Everything gets a break. The animals get a break. The land gets a break. As a matter of fact, God built specific things into the Sabbath so that the land would get rest. Because you know what our earth needs? It needs rest. But in our culture, we do with people what we do with the earth and what we do with everything else. We use it until it cannot be used up anymore. And when it's done, we throw it away. That's what we do with people in our culture. We use them until all the usefulness has been pulled out of them. And then when it's pulled out, we stick them in a nursing home somewhere to die. That is what we do in American culture. And so, look, we don't understand. God created us to take a break. God created us and the world we live in to every so often take a break. You know, I've never farmed with animal power. I love the internal combustion engine. But, you know, my dad grew up on a farm where when he was a boy, one of the things he did is he logged. He had to help lead the horses out. And so they logged with horses. And so one of the things my dad had to do is he had to lead the horses out of the woods as they would pull their logs out. And so I can't imagine that you would think an animal would be built to work and work and work and work until it falls over dead. It's not what a good farmer does with his animals. He treats them well. And so just like we need a break, the livestock of the world needs a break. And the earth itself needs a break. And so maybe you're thinking this morning, Pastor, I hear what you're saying. Look, I'm just not into this whole Sabbath thing. I'm good. I'm healthy. I don't need a break. You may not think you do, but apparently God did. And not only did God think you needed a break, the earth needs a break. And the things we use in the earth need a break. Everything needs a Sabbath. And so the idea of rest is bigger than what we often want to think about. It's bigger than me taking a day off. Because look, I'm telling you, there are some times when I don't think I need a day off. Like today. I don't know. Woke up feeling good. Rhonda wasn't locked out last night, but I still woke up feeling good. I'm thinking, okay, you know, I got a day free. What can I do today? Does anybody else think like that? Making plans in your mind to think, okay, what can I do today? Maybe Gabe and I could go fishing. You just hang out. That's good, relaxing activity. Or maybe I could, you know, I don't know. I just go through all these things in my mind that I could do. And so I don't always think I need a day of rest. But what about everything around me? Does everything around me need a rest? And I think the answer would be yes. You know, when I look at what's going on in our culture, well, never mind. I'm not going to say that. I just offend somebody. I don't know. Look, I just look at our culture and I think we need a rest. And you know what I've realized? We've kind of been forced to take a rest, haven't we? I mean, over the last 2.5 months, a lot of people couldn't do what they normally do. And it's almost like God is saying, hey, you people of earth, if you're not willing to listen to what I say, I'm going to make you do it anyway. And I think I said this on Wednesday night, and I'll end with this probably. You know, part of the reason that Israel went into captivity is because they failed to observe the Sabbaths. And we don't always pick up on that, I don't think. But one of the things God says about the 70 years of captivity is that in that time, the land would get to enjoy the Sabbaths that it never got to enjoy while the people governed the land. Because instinctively in our fallen state, and even sometimes in our regenerated state, we don't think about the need for life to rest so that it can be rejuvenated and replenished. We don't think about life needing to get some downtime so it can maybe be recreated in something new. But when you think about it, spiritually, isn't that exactly what God does for us in what we call revival? Isn't that what God does for us when we're born again? God is recreating what was torn down, or He is re-energizing what was worn out. You see, that principle exists in almost everything we do. And so, as we talk about, the Sabbath as a rest, it's more than just taking a day to do or not do certain things. I think American culture, and even people who say, well, Brian, I'm not very legalistic. No, even people who say that have still turned the Sabbath, or the idea of a Sabbath, into a day of do's and don'ts. And that's not what God intended the Sabbath to be. Jesus was very clear as He explained the Sabbath in the New Testament. Man wasn't made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath was made for us. God made a way in which we could rest. God made a way in which the whole world could rest. Does anybody remember the days in Waverly when on Sunday almost everything was shut down? I mean, as a kid, I remember a little bit of it. But there was a time when you would go into town on a Sunday. Matter of fact, my father-in-law was telling me just the other day. He said, I remember when pharmacies in Waverly would take turns shutting down because they believed the pharmacy needed to be open, but they had some kind of agreement where one would be open and the other one would close, so that everybody at some point got a day off. See, we used to understand as a culture we needed a break. But now, for some reason, we've kind of outthought that, or maybe we've outgrown that, and we've arrived at a point where we don't think we need a rest or a break at all. Let me tell you, as I look at culture in a very, I'm not a sociologist, not a psychologist, I can't diagnose anything like that. In my observation, as I look at our culture, we're absolutely worn out, and we're killing ourselves as we go through the rat race of life. Not because we're doing backbreaking work that is sending us to our graves early. It's because we fill our lives with stuff that we have to go out and work extra to pay for the stuff. And then when we've accumulated all of this stuff, we're faced with this dilemma. What do I do with all the stuff that I've got? Well, I know what I'll do. I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my barn and I'll build a bigger barn. And when I've built my bigger barn, I'll bestow all my labors. And after I've bestowed all my labor there, I know what I can do. I can sit back and I can take it easy and I can enjoy life. And you know what that dude in Luke missed? He missed the real understanding of what life is all about. See, he thought it was about working hard to get ahead. But he found out when his soul was required that he missed everything that God was trying to do in his life. See, God has given us an opportunity to rest. He doesn't want us to work, killing ourselves, so that we can get ahead. He wants us to take a break so that He could enjoy the life that He's given us. Stand with me this morning and bow your heads. Father, again, we want to thank You for the day that You have allowed us to come together. We're thankful that we could be, without masks this morning. That's a big step for us. And we're looking forward to next week when we can come together